Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are. On behalf of AASHTO, welcome to the first virtual session for 2020 for Knowledge Management. I trust that everyone is well. My name is King Ji, and I am the staff liaison for the Committee on Knowledge Management. I want to thank Laurie Economy of Utah DOT for leading the planning team for this 2020 CKM series of meetings, which is now virtual. Laurie will kick off the webinar shortly, but first, let me introduce Denise Peralta. She is our AASHTO Management Fellow this year from New Mexico DOT, and she'll be serving as the organizer of the webinar, and she will go over some logistical details. Thank you again for joining us. Here's Denise.
Thank you, King. Again, I'm Denise Peralta from New Mexico. I am an AASHTO Fellow this year, and thank you guys again for joining us. The next slide. So I just wanted to go over a few things with you. This is a virtual meeting, and again, all attendees are muted. During the questions, if you would like to speak, you may raise your hand or type in the questions box. When your hand is raised, we will call on you, and with that, we will unmute you. If you are on a telephone, you do need to enter your audio PIN, and you can look at it on your box to see what PIN number it is, and you just enter your audio PIN and pound. Again, the next thing is the questions. If you have any questions, you can type your questions in the chat box and we'll get with you. Next one. And I would like to mention our premier sponsors. We have AECOM, Bentley, HNTB, Jacobs, and WSP. I'm going to turn it over now to Laurie.
Hello, everyone, and welcome again to the virtual version of our CKM annual meeting. First, I just want to begin by wishing everyone well during this really complicated time. We do have so many people registered for the event, so I'm sure that there is someone out there who is impacted, and just know that our hearts are going out to you. And for all the rest of us, I hope everybody is doing well as we face the challenges right now. As most of you know, the Committee on Knowledge Management was supposed to be meeting and networking in person this week in New Orleans. And since that's not possible, the Annual Planning Committee chose to put together a few online webinars that would be the same topics that we had planned to do during our annual meeting. And so we do have, if you guys were sitting in hold, hopefully that you did see the annual, the other webinars that will be coming up. Hopefully they're showing on your screen right now. We're going to be doing today's, which is the KM journey and where are you on the path. August, we're going to be covering building a business case for knowledge management. In October, establishing a community of practice and information sharing. And then in December, we'll be covering lessons learned and doing a panel. If any of you would like to be involved, we'd love to have others engage in that process. And so please get in touch with anyone on our either steering committee or our annual planning committee. And speaking of that, I would like to just take a moment really quick and thank our steering committee and the annual planning committee. I think we have a slide with those names on there. Is that true? There we go. Thank you so much. Over the past 10 months or so, most of these folks that you see here on the screen now have been meeting and planning this out, hopefully to provide you guys with some useful information about knowledge management and some things you can do inside of your organizations to promote that, that cause within the organization. That being said, we know that there were going to be quite a few committees joining us at the Agency Admin Conference in New Orleans. So we wanted to quickly take a poll and see how many different committees we have represented here today. Whether you are a member of the committee or a friend, we think we have them all. They're listed, and of course, other if you are from a different committee that we don't have listed. really quick. We'll give you guys a moment to choose which of those committees you are either a member of or a friend.
In order for everyone to vote, please make sure your screen is not in full screen mode. And when it's not in full screen mode, you're able to select an answer and submit your results.
So do we have, I'm looking for participation in the poll.
We have about 75% that have answered. Would you like to close it?
Just so you guys know, we have about 75%. We would love to get everybody's participation to know which committees that you're representing today. If you would take just a moment and do that, that would be great. All right, let's go ahead in the sake of time and close that out. I appreciate everyone for participating. Just another note, we want to let you guys know that we did create some job aids in reference to the webinar today. So those will be available out on the AASHTO's Community of Practice site. You'll be able to download a copy of the presentation as well as our job aid resources. Again, just real quick to say thank you to those listed here. A special thanks to our steering committee and Victoria. Lenny is always such a big help. And on my end, Elena Spindla from Utah, I couldn't have done without her. So a special thank you to her. She's hiding behind the scenes in there. So, with that, all of that being said, I want to go ahead and take a moment to welcome our speaker. Today, we're going to have Maureen Hammer, Dr. Maureen Hammer. She's been with the Battelle Memorial Institute since 2016, and prior to that, she served as the Knowledge Management Officer at Virginia DOT for 12 years. Dr. Hammer has over 25 years of experience in information and knowledge management. She's created and managed a library and information services and knowledge management programs in a variety of industries and is acknowledged as an expert in knowledge management and government organizations. She has significant experience in knowledge transfer, tools and techniques, and the development and maintenance of knowledge portals and business intelligent delivery systems. Under her leadership, VDOT Knowledge Management Program was recognized by AASHTO and Transportation Officials Performance Management Committee in 2009 with the Trailblazer Award, and was a finalist in 2008 Harvard Innovations in Government Award. Additionally, a finalist in the 2007 KM Reality Award for KM World. So we have an expert with us here today to talk about the knowledge management journey. Maureen, thank you so much for taking your time to present with us and educate just a little bit more on knowledge management practices. Thank you. We can't hear you just yet, Maureen.
Thank you. Sorry, I had to get myself unmuted. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I love talking about knowledge management. I've spent 25 years in this particular field, and I look forward to the questions that you all might have. If you all don't mind, I'm going to take myself off the webcam so that I can see people can see you. Okay. So the knowledge management journey. If Megan, can we go to the next slide? So what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to provide you with background and the basics to make sure that we are all level set on knowledge management and how it's being defined. And then we're going to talk about how to get started, how to expand your program. what a mature program looks like, and then a review. Prior to diving in, we would very much like to know where you are in that spectrum. Are you learning? Are you getting started? Are you expanding? Or do you feel like you have a mature program? So Denise, could you put the first poll up, please? And if you all could please select one.
We have 84% that's voted.
Okay. While I would like 100%, I'm okay if you want to go ahead and close it, and let's see where people are at.
Okay, here's the result.
Okay,
And
so the best. Okay.
85% voted.
Okay, so vast majority are learning what KM is and getting started, with a few expanding and a few with a mature program. Great, thank you. Let's go back to the slides. And if we can move to the next slide, please. I'm sorry, one more. So in order to make sure that we're all on the same page, I would like to provide you with the definition of knowledge management. So really what this is about is managing the life cycle of knowledge. You can see that it ranges from identifying to collecting to organizing, disseminating, and then actually using critical knowledge within an organization. Critical is kind of a keyword there. We all know quite a bit, although we don't always know what we know until someone asks us a question, but it's the critical knowledge that is important to the organization and to the core functions of the organization that you want to make sure that you focus on. So what you're doing is attempting to identify what knowledge an organization and employees hold, who needs it, and how to provide it to the right people at the right time. Just one more segue into knowledge itself. There's an asterisk there that helps you define what knowledge is. So there are two primary forms. There's explicit, where you've been able to actually capture that knowledge and document it somehow, and that is called explicit or information. The other is tacit. It's experience and expertise that's influenced by context. And so that's what everybody has in their heads, that they may share verbally, or they may be able to document if they're asked the right question, but it's not something that's readily available to the organization. Can we go to the next slide, please, Megan? Thank you. So why transportation needs KM? Knowledge is at risk for transportation because practitioners bring academic knowledge to the job, but then they increase that knowledge through practical experiences. So they've moved on, they've had experiences, they've learned something. That something may or may not be documented for others in the organization to take advantage of, because we're all really busy. And so people don't take time to reflect and to document that. In order to prevent that knowledge loss, you need to ensure that that knowledge remains in circulation and that it continues to be evaluated, validated, or invalidated. One of the things about knowledge is that the need for that changes over a period of time. So what was really important 20 years ago may not be practical today. You still want to retain elements of that knowledge, but you also don't want it getting in the way of the new knowledge that is being created. If we could move on to the next slide. So why do you want to do knowledge management? So it's dependent on the particular organization's goals and needs, but four primary areas are: one, you need to mitigate that potential loss of knowledge due to retirements in the changing workforce. You may want to make knowledge and information findable. You may have a goal of improving performance, or perhaps you want to support innovation. You may also have a combination of these particular goals. Denise, if we could put the next poll up and ask people to identify what is the purpose of KM in your organization, or why are you interested in this? And we'd like you to select all that apply, please.
We are just over 80% that have voted.
Okay, let's see the results. Okay, well, that was pretty across the board. And that works. Thank you. So let's go to the next slide. A little more background information. So I believe the committee has talked about the 4 pillars of KM: people, processes, technology, data, and information. People and groups of people hold knowledge that arise from their training and experience, and that knowledge may or may not be documented. And if it is documented, often it is the what versus the why. The culture of the organization matters because you need to have a culture that encourages you to be efficient and effective. So efficient is about doing things well. Effective is about doing the right thing. It also needs to be a culture that supports knowledge transfer and rewards teams rather than an individual. So you're rewarded for sharing that knowledge. Sharing that knowledge is often supported by technology. So things like knowledge portals, or repositories, or even natural language processing. And then you have data and information. So defined here as authoritative information for analysis and decision making. Again, that knowledge and information are gleaned from people and activities so that it can be transferred to others. And you want to keep these 4 pillars of KM in your mind because they are going to impact some of the planning that you do. So again, we'd like to do another poll and ask you which of the 4 KM pillars is the biggest challenge to your organization, and please select one. So is it the people? Is it the process? Is it data and information? Or is it technology? And if you are looking at your organization culture being part of the problem, can you please check process?
Okay, we have 85% that have voted.
Okay. So people, process seem to be the major ones, although we do have data and information and technology noted. So over half though, people and process. Thank you. Let's go to the next slide. So let's talk a little bit more about each of those purposes for doing knowledge management. The first one we're going to start with is mitigating potential knowledge loss. Why is that an issue today? Because we no longer have the organizations of the past where people came to work just out of school or training and they stayed for their entire career. We no longer have the apprenticeship programs where people were taught and knowledge was transferred as they moved up a ladder or across an organization. That's not bad. In fact, knowledge within the organization can be increased when employees come from different backgrounds and experiences. You just need to have an awareness of this. The key is to create opportunities for people to share and leverage that knowledge. So there are some tools listed over on the right: directories of expertise, capability networks, also known as communities of practice, and knowledge books. These are things that you can do when you are anticipating a retirement wave, you've got a lot of new employees, you have movement within the organization, or employee tenure has shortened. So directories of expertise. I know that that is something that has been used in the past, not always to great success, but it's actually very useful. If you can make a determination about who is going to say what that expertise is, whether that is the individual listing their expertise themselves and having that validated by a manager, and I know that takes time, but if you can do that, you can then attach that expertise to that person. So when you go out searching for information, you will also get a return on the person who can help you with that and answer questions and supplement that written information. So it's extremely valuable to know who has that. It will also help you identify, if you're doing a knowledge audit, where you have not enough bench strength in a particular area. So maybe you're only 1 or 2 people deep in something that is critical knowledge for the organization. It may not be needed more than once or twice a year, but both of these folks have made noises about retiring or leaving the organization, or they play the lottery regularly, and who knows, they might win and be gone tomorrow. So this will give you an opportunity to capture what knowledge you do have in your organization. How do you transfer that knowledge? One of my favorite tools personally is communities of practice. So what you do is you pull people together in the same functional area with the same interest. You keep the group rather small. You mix it up with people that you know are experts, along with people who might be novices in that particular area, and you give them a charge to create something that has captured knowledge in their area. So they might be working on a process, they might be looking at lessons learned, whatever that might be. But what you've started to do is to build up that network within your organization that ensures that people know who to talk to when they have a question, and also helps you identify additional knowledge that has come in. I talked about if you are only 1 or 2 deep in a particular area, that's when a knowledge book comes into play. That is pretty resource intensive to do, but it's very valuable. So if you don't have a lot of people with that knowledge, you're going to want to document what those individuals have so that you have something that future employees can refer to. One of the things that I would say on this is it's really easy to document the what that people know. A little bit more difficult to document the why, but sometimes that's the most critical part of it. So as an example, when I was at VDOT, we had a particular area of expertise that we only had literally one person in the organization who held that knowledge. And so we actually went out with them and followed them around for a while and asked questions and recorded what they were doing to create a knowledge book for that particular area of expertise. Next slide, please. You may want to focus on making knowledge and information findable. So do you have an intranet or a knowledge portal where you have captured that information? How many technology systems do you have, and how do they relate or not relate? Do you have a library? Do you have an expertise directory? Do you have a data governance practice? So it may be that you've done well, or you believe that you've done well at documenting the knowledge that you have, but it's kind of scattered all over the place. So what can you do? You can create a corporate document center where you place that information. You can look at data enrichment, where you're linking things across disparate systems to make sure that if you're searching for something, it's going to come up with all of those possibilities. And in order to manage those, you need a common taxonomy. So where would you use things like this? For instance, when I was at VDOT, and I apologize, I keep using transportation examples, but I think those are the most relevant for all of you. It's spread out in districts. People create and collect a lot of documentation on projects, but here's the problem. They're all storing it differently. It might be in individual computers. It might be in specific systems. It might be on Box or on SharePoint, all of those different places, but it's not in one single place. And so if you can find a way to either create links across those or get the important parts of that information into a corporate document center, then you've gone a long way towards making something findable. I'm working on a project right now where it is an organization that has, I don't know, close to 1 million users, and they have hundreds of different repositories. Their whole purpose is to make information available, and they can't really get rid of those different systems. So what they've chosen to do is that data enrichment. So getting a data manager in there, looking at the fields that make up those different systems and figuring out where they can link that across, developing scripts that are going to help you do that and making it accessible off of a portal, which is what they're doing. Next slide, please. Perhaps what you want to do is to improve performance. So do you need to decrease time for completion of tasks? Do you want to better integrate functions? Do you need to streamline processes? So business process reengineering is a tool that I'm sure many of you have heard about. What you do when you're doing it from a knowledge management perspective is you do take a look, you do interviews, you figure out what that process is, you figure out whether or not people are talking about it the same, you figure out whether or not there are steps in there that are only there because 15 years ago you had a system that required a specific type of information. And then behind those boxes for each of those steps, you want to attach that information that is authoritative, that tells somebody how to complete something. Here is the document that you need to fill out. Here are the resources that you can consult if you have a question about it. So it's bringing all of that together. You also need to increase communication and collaboration with within the organization. So one of the things that you might discover when you're doing that business process reengineering is that you're still doing a handoff between phases of a project. So you've got the designer who creates it and they hand it off to the construction folks. They construct a project, then they hand it off to the maintenance folks, but there's no overlap and there's no going back to see whether or not there's feedback on those plans or feedback on how that was constructed and how it impacts maintenance going forward. So that's something that you want to build in to that new business process. You also want to take advantage of before, during, and after action reviews. So before you start something, you sit down as a team and you take a look at what's been done in this particular area before. Did they learn something? Are there suggestions about how you can avoid having to relearn that going forward, or things that you should be thinking about? You do reviews during at specific big milestones. To figure out, how did that go? Did we learn something? Do we need to reflect on that? Did we do it really well? And then after action reviews to look at that whole project again as a whole. One of the things that organizations really struggle with is people are so incredibly busy. And so most folks engage in what would be called a single loop learning cycle, where they come across a problem and they fix it and they move on, but they never go back and really document it or review it and see whether or not this is something that is common across the organization. So they didn't do a double loop, right? To come back and say, okay, we want to prevent this happening in the future and we don't want to keep reinventing the wheel. So we're going to figure out what that was. So one of the things that you can do with this is have a community of practice that is really taking a look at what kinds of things you've created or that you could create as part of that reflection. So maybe having a community of practice that is saying, okay, so let's take a look at these after action reviews from these different projects and let's figure out whether or not there are some things that we need to integrate into the process going forward. Next slide, please. The fourth area is supporting innovation. So do you want to encourage creative thinking? Do you want to build new services or functions? Do you want to deploy new research or ideas? Does your organization encourage ideas and learning? So adopting innovative practices. There are organizations out there, including the one that I work for, where we're actually allowed a certain percentage of time to create new things. Sometimes with minimal funding, sometimes it's just with time, but it's definitely encouraged that we're going to be creative and think about a problem from a different perspective. You need to encourage people to submit ideas. Just because someone has submitted an idea does not mean that you have to adopt it, but it gets those ideas out there. And if you have a community of practice who are experts in a particular area and they're reviewing it, it may be that they can iterate with that person and create something new that the organization can benefit from. You also want to engage in a great deal of coaching and mentoring. So teaching people how to be self-reflective, teaching people how to think creatively. One of the problems that I see over and over and over again is that people lose sight of the end goal. They get stymied by the blocks that appear. And with coaching and mentoring, you can teach them how to take a step back and realize that this is something that can be overcome. You might have to go around it or under it or over it or smash right through it, but you can get to that end goal and you can learn something as you're going through it. Thank you. So who does KM? KM has been done for a great many years. I started myself 25 years ago, and I was in the healthcare field. We didn't actually call it KM then, but that's what it was. It's flourished in the oil and gas industry and the energy sector, in legal firms, across the technology sector, in financial services, pharmaceutical, medical, manufacturing. It's flourished in the military. That's who came up with the after action reviews. Transportation sector has cultivated a lot of private and public sector knowledge management communities and has established dedicated communities of knowledge management practitioners, in large part through the research, information dissemination, and convening efforts of AASHTO and TRB. And I would encourage the sector to take it to that next step so that we start to see all of those folks that say that they're just beginning, we start to see bigger numbers in that expanding and mature phases. So there are several roles when you are constructing a knowledge management initiatives. You have people who, and these roles may be filled by individuals, by a team, by several parts of the organization, but you need a strategist who's going to define this. You need somebody who's persuasive. You need someone who's organized. You need a strong facilitator. And above all else, you need someone who knows how to measure results. Next slide, please. So let's delve into this a little bit more. So the strategist is the person who's defining the role of KM and aligning that with the organizational goals and objectives. And what we have listed here are things that you could put into a job description for them. They need to be able to think globally. They need access to the organizational leadership. The organization itself needs to have a strategic plan and well-articulated goals. There needs to be an understanding of the critical pain points, challenges, and opportunities. That's where a knowledge audit comes in. needs to have an awareness of the state of the transportation world and an ability to articulate a strategic plan. Next slide, please. You also need to have someone who is a persuader. This is the person that can make the business case to invest in KM techniques and approaches that make sense to decision makers. So that this person needs to understand what is compelling for the decision makers and what keeps them up at night. They need to be someone who requires accuracy in the cost-benefit analysis of the proposed approach. And I always advocate being very conservative in that cost-benefit result so that people don't look at you and say, well, that's completely impossible. They need to have somebody who has a history of trusting relationships and a strong history of delivering. And they need to be able to develop case studies based on pilots and projects to make the case for going to that next step. Next slide, please. You need someone who is extremely organized. This is the person or the team that's going to provide oversight and infrastructure. So they need the authority to actually stand up the infrastructure. They need staff to help deliver, or else they need identified champions in the organization that can be tapped. This is the person who helps get buy-in from middle management about why this is valuable and they should allow people to spend time on these projects. And they need to be able to clearly articulate activities and what is needed to meet the goals. Next slide, please. Facilitation is also key. This is where you're providing active support to participants. So this person needs to be neutral. For example, if you're sitting down with a group and you're trying to delve into a process, it's really valuable for that person who is facilitating that business process reengineering to have some understanding, but they also need to be really careful about not putting their own stamp on it. They have to step back and listen to the other experts. So sometimes you're better off having someone who doesn't know anything about a process coming in. They need to be able to provide whatever support participants need to be successful. That means this person themselves needs to be a strong networker within the organization and have an idea about who they can call on for different elements of support. And they also need to be able to provide the physical production of reports and other products that have been created by the participants. Next slide, please. And measurer. I don't have as much listed here, but this is so key. You have to be able to demonstrate that there is a return on investment if you're going to do a knowledge management activity. That return could be demonstrated by qualitative or quantitative metrics. So you need somebody who understands what those are. You need somebody who understands which ones are important to the organization's decision makers, managers, and leaders. So for instance, is saving time the most important? Is it decreasing time on a particular activity? Is it avoiding a cost in the future because you've learned something now and you've made sure that's been put into the process going forward? You need to be able to figure out how to demonstrate that. And you need to be able to write a compelling story in your assessment reports. So, I'm sorry, can we go back for just a second? Because I think we have another poll here. So please select all that apply. Do you have these roles in your organization? And more importantly, at your fingertips if you're getting ready to start an initiative.
So we're getting to a minute and we have 65% that have voted.
Okay, in the interest of time, I think we'll go ahead and take a look at the results. And it looks like it's pretty even across the board. Measurer is probably the one that it appears people are least secure about. And we can go ahead and go back to the slide. And next slide. So what are the critical elements for success in creating a knowledge management initiative? So leadership. You need to have a leadership that believes that it is a responsibility to share knowledge and expertise. So not just, yeah, that's nice, but it is the responsibility of everyone in this organization to share what they know and create additional expertise across their colleagues. And you need to have management who understands that making time for employees to participate is important and it's worthwhile. So that's the top down. You also need the bottom up. You need grassroots. So you need the folks that are the boots on the ground, or the folks that are sitting there and designing your road projects. You need to be able to explain to them how this is going to help them. And you need to acknowledge that while knowledge is personal, it's needed by others. Sometimes it takes a bit of effort to encourage people to share that knowledge because they may not know what they know if you don't ask them the right question. And two, they may feel like, well, if I tell you what I know, then maybe I'm not so important to the organization, which again ties back to the leadership. You also need a culture that encourages people to share that knowledge and encourages teamwork. So it's rewarding that, not just individuals. And you need a learning organization. You need an organization that understands that single loop learning is not enough. You need to take time to go back and reflect and improve those processes and that knowledge going forward so that you don't keep reinventing the same wheel and you start to learn new things. So I believe there's a poll. Which critical elements provide support for KM in your organization? Denise, does it look like we've got enough?
At 40 seconds, we have 60% that have voted.
Okay. In the interest of leaving enough time for questions later, what kind of results do we get? Oh, I love that employees are encouraged to share ideas and collaborate is one of the highest. That's wonderful. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so I've given you a lot of background, basic information so far. Now we're going to talk about actually getting started and expanding your program. Note that the process, I'm going to explain most of that during the getting started portion of these slides. And just as a reminder, the slides and along with some really valuable handouts that pull out the main points from this presentation are available for download. Okay, so the process, I'm going to explain it in the getting started section, but you use it at all the levels. Tools, which includes technology. So the tools that we reviewed are dependent on the goals of your organization, not the phase. So remember, it's what goal you're trying to achieve that determines what tools that you're using. Can't emphasize enough, measurement, regardless of the phase, measurement and evaluation are critical. People, communication is critical regardless of the phase. And content, you need the ability to identify and access authoritative resources regardless of the phase. So let's move on to getting started. Next slide, please. Thank you. So if you're getting ready to, or thinking about starting a KM initiative, so you're ready to plan or you're ready to pilot, the questions that you need to answer are: 1, what does KM mean to this organization? 2, what is the perspective and attitude towards KM from both the leadership and from the grassroots? You need to think about doing a simple high-level knowledge audit. Who holds the information, that knowledge, and where is it documented or not documented? How can I build on past experience? So are there things that your organization has done in an attempt to capture some of this knowledge, but maybe it's been very localized? Have they done something that you can build on? What do you need to set aside? So you don't want to be too ambitious on what you're doing. You need to focus in. You need to know what resources you're going to need, and you need to figure out how to create the buy-in. Next slide, please. So what do we mean by strategy? You need 3 levels. You need to have a vision and an end goal. That's the strategic. Tactical, you need to create the infrastructure. So that's the partnerships and the systems that you're going to need to support your initiative. And then operational, what specific projects and activities will be performed in your KM initiative. Next, please. So strategic questions to answer. So what does KM mean to this organization? And we've listed those 4 purposes again. Can you articulate the vision and end goals or outcomes desired? So it can't be nebulous. You're never going to get the buy-in. You need to be very, very specific about what it is you're trying to accomplish. And does your organization have an intent to manage knowledge, to transfer it, to retain it, and to create it? Next, please. Tactical questions. This is where you're looking out there and you're saying, okay, what are the perspectives and attitudes towards KM? So people might say, well, if the CEO wants it, then I guess we're gonna play. Or I know the CEO doesn't believe in it quite as strongly as I do, but I am all for this because I'm really worried about my particular functional area, whatever that happens to be. So figure out who are your stakeholders, who still needs to be persuaded, who's ready, and who needs to be connected in order to expand their own knowledge base. What systems do you need? Are there existing processes you can leverage, or do you need to create them? Do you need technology, or is that already available? And that would include, do you have access to the information and data that has already been collected? So remember, I talked about things were stored on shared drives, or they were stored on SharePoint, or they're out on Box, or they're on somebody's local computer. Do you know where that's at? Do you know how to get them centralized? Next slide, please. Operational questions that you need to answer when you're planning this. Where am I going to start? So do you have opportunities that rise to the top? Are those aligned with where your champions are? And what's going to provide the most compelling story to the people who are who hold the purse strings and can provide you with the funding that you need to create this initiative? In order to persuade them, you need to know how you're going to measure your success. You need to understand what your time frame is, and you need to be able to put a cost to it. And that includes the cost of taking somebody off of a project for a few hours a month to work on this, because that's going to matter to your middle management. Next question, please. Next slide, please. Not next question. Assessment and evaluation. Just like anything else, you need to have some checkpoints and milestones during your initiative. So are you on track? Do you need to adjust this a little bit? Do you have a baseline that you can work off of? And how will you measure? And here I've listed out some of the most common measurements that I've used. So cost avoidance, cost savings, time savings, efficiencies gained, or qualitative. And qualitative can be someone in the senior leadership that emphasizes why this is so important, or somebody with their boots on the ground who says, you know what, this project would have failed if I hadn't had access to X. Next slide, please. What should you expect? You're going to hit resistance. We don't have time for this. You're going to have people saying, prove it, which is why I really encourage the use of pilot projects to demonstrate the value of what you're trying to do. You're going to have to be prepared for questions. How are you going to replicate this on a larger scale is something that's really common. You're going to have to prove what the cost benefit is, or you're going to have trouble getting the resources, primarily the individuals who can contribute to this initiative and their time. And lessons learned. You need to be very proactive about capturing that. What did you learn as you were going through this that revises your approach in the future? Next slide, please. Okay, before we go to expanding, I think we have a slide or
It's going to be questions
it's
and answers.
questions. Thank you.
I'll let you.
Have we had any questions?
We do have a few questions. I can start with the first one, Maureen, which is, this kind of goes back. We have a few from the beginning. So I have about 3 in here.
Okay.
So one of the first ones is, with COVID, a lot of state agencies are looking at layoffs and furloughs due to budget cuts. How are people retaining knowledge in these trying times? And that comes from Enid White.
Okay, excellent question. So that's one of the big concerns, because there are layoffs and reorganizations or downsizing or furloughs or all of that going on. And if you haven't done anything about capturing knowledge, you're definitely behind the curve. I do think that is one of the things that will resonate with your leadership. It's got to be something that keeps them up at night. So I think what you have to, what most organizations that are practiced at this are looking at is going back and saying, what are the core functions of this organization? We've got a lot of knowledge in a lot of areas, but what is the core knowledge? Are we going to retain that? Who's the staff that holds that? Where's that information placed? And that's why you want to focus in on a quick knowledge audit and taking a look at exactly where is this stuff documented that we can start to pull together, and do we have an expert who can join it together in a way that makes sense. Next question.
Okay, looks like the next question is, how do we organize knowledge gained from seminars, webinars to benefit from them after some time? For example, create a resource and refer to that easily. And just a reminder for everyone, this is being recorded as we answer the questions. So,
okay, can you say that question one more time, because I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, basically they're wanting to know, how do we organize the knowledge that we gain from webinars so that we have access to it later as a reference and a resource?
Okay, so yes, that was a good reminder that there are handouts. You've got the AASHTO committee, you've got a TRB committee that both have sites where that information can be collected. One of the things that I would really encourage is to take a look through this, and if you would, imagine what your initiative would be. So we get done with this seminar, what initiative do you want to take, and write your own story about case study about that, because that will help solidify it in your head and also help you remember the practical aspects of a KM initiative. I love case studies. They really do help. Next question.
Okay, we have another one here. Curiosity to hear more about process improvement and innovation as part of KM work. That's from Allison.
Okay, so process improvements really do lead to innovation, because when you start to take a look at how something is done, most often you'll find that there are a lot of extraneous steps involved that have been put in there for a very proper purpose. At one point in time, it was because of a political need, or it was because of a system need or a technology need, but it isn't really reflective of how it can be done today. So it allows you to streamline that. It also then allows you to go and find the supporting documentation and information that's been collected that you can insert behind each of those boxes on the process and figure out where you're lacking something, and then go out and talk to the experts in that area to create it. And when you start to look at that, you start to see where some innovation can occur, particularly when it goes from one part of the organization to another. So if you're doing a process from A to Z, you start to see where there are opportunities to be innovative in how you're working together. One of the things that I used to talk about when I was still at VDOT was so many of our transportation organizations were still built as if we were an assembly line. You had one function that did A, then they handed it off, then it was B, and then it was C. And that worked really well when we were building the interstate. In fact, it was probably the most efficient way to go about it. But we are moving more into maintenance and system operations now. We're still doing some construction, but you can't construct yourself out of heavy traffic anymore, because I'm in Virginia. So I look at Northern Virginia and say, it's not like you can build a whole lot more roads. So how are you going to run those more efficiently? So you need more of that close collaboration across. And when you're bringing people with different expertise to the table, you avoid that group think where everybody has the same background. If you're bringing somebody from maintenance and systems operations in to talk to the designers and the folks that are in the construction area, you're going to get a lot more creative ideas about things that you can do. So I hope I answered that. Any more?
We do have a couple more questions here. One
Okay.
of them is how to utilize KM, or how will KM work in the virtual environment?
It actually works very well. I would guess that most people are discovering that they're having difficulty getting access to things that they need because they can't walk down the hall anymore. And so I think if nothing else, it's going to help you identify where some of those gaps are that need to be filled and provide you with your very first project. So having to be dependent on a virtual interaction, one, people start speaking up more with things like the webinar or team meetings. Two, like I said, it identifies that I need to access this type of information or knowledge, and I can't find it where I thought I could find it. And so you start to find, as I said, projects that you might want to do. And somebody is supposed to check out the Knowledge Management and Transportation Live Guide. So, yes. Okay.
We have one more question here,
Okay.
and the Check Out the Knowledge came from Lenny. That was a reminder to everyone. She provided a link there. So
Thank
we
you.
just sent that out to the whole group. And also the last question we have here in the questions comes from Lily, and it's, which office/functional areas do you typically see the KM effort within a DOT?
I think that really varies. My personal belief, this is more about people who have a passion for it, and who can fulfill those different roles. So you might see it in your HR area, you might see it in your research area, you might see it in your project management office. It could come from a variety of places. It really is more about the individual, their passion, their expertise in KM, or their ability to fill one of those roles rather than where it's actually placed. So that would be very much an organizational role. I've fulfilled it in a research arena, in a technology division, in a legal department, and in a library. So that was just me. I don't think it really matters. It's where can you get the support and find the people. Okay, any more?
Great, thank you, Maureen. Sorry, I do have some questions coming in. Do you want to take them now, or do you want to finish and take them at the end?
Let's go through this. I've just got a couple slides here for the next two, and then we'll take some more.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. Questions to answer. Where should the focus be? Okay, am I on the right slide? I am, right? This is the expanding. Yes, thank you. So again, you're going to follow the same process, but the questions are slightly different. So where should the focus be? How am I going to show my outcomes? How am I going to foster buy-in? Where does KM fit in the organizational structure, which was one of the questions that was just asked? How to grow it, how to make it sustainable, how to adapt it, and yet keep the core focus and integrity. So when you're getting ready to expand, in the beginning, you've done some pilot, maybe some very small initiatives to prove that this is actually viable. Now you want to take it out and you want to carry it across the organization or a part of the organization. So you take a look at that and you say, what really worked well and what's going to speak to this next area? How am I going to talk to this new group about the outcomes that we got from the previous area to help foster that buy-in? That's when you start taking a look at, is there a better place for this KM in the organizational structure? So it might be that the person who is the strategist is in the HR, but the person who is really organized about it is in the PMO office, right? So maybe this is something that is cross-functional, but maybe you're putting the funding where the strategist is. You've got to figure out at this point, how are you going to grow it? Because it does take people's time and energy, both to organize those initiatives, but also to get participation across the organization. How do you make it sustainable? So you don't want this to be a one and done. In the early phases, you're very much trying to be a visionary and persuading people to participate. As you get into this, you've really got to nail down what's that infrastructure that you need to have in order to sustain this going forward. And how do you adapt and yet keep the core focus and integrity? So one of the things that you'll hear a lot when you're in the expanding is someone coming to you and asking you a question that's maybe just peripheral to what you've been doing, but they want to throw it under KM. Don't say no. Figure out a way to help them out using some of the tools and things that you've learned in your KM initiative to help them be successful and to help grow your program. Next slide, and one more. So mature, so questions to answer. Was I successful in institutionalizing? What maturity level have we reached? Who and what should take it to the next level? So maybe you have expanded it and it's across maybe half the organization. Do you need an executive sponsor at this point who's really going to take it to that next level and make it integral to the organization? How would it or should it change if the lead left or if there was a turnover in leadership? So on the one hand, how would this change if someone took over your role in the KM initiative? And how would it change if there's a turnover in leadership? Every commissioner or director or whatever the title is for your transportation agency has a different vision about what they want to accomplish during their tenure. I survived five commissioners and secretaries of transportation because we were adaptable. We had proven it under the first commissioner, we expanded it under the second, and we matured it through the rest of them. Again, that's where the measurement becomes so incredibly important. I do want to point out that one of the items that you can download, I believe it was a spreadsheet. Is it spreadsheet or are they all PDF now? Yeah, it's a spreadsheet. KM Journey Example Plan Job Aid. Please take a look at that because that's going to give you more information on each of these phases under those 4 pillars: people, process, technology, and data and information. And we're going to go to the next poll, please.
Maureen, this is the poll you wanted, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So we have 51% that have voted.
Okay.
Would you like to close it?
Yeah, go ahead and close it. Okay. So mitigating knowledge loss, and which in this time of COVID-19, I definitely understand, and findability of expertise. Again, given our circumstances, these do not surprise me. Okay, can we go back and next slide? So these major lessons learned are what I have collected after 25 years of being in this field. So it's under sustainability. Knowledge is very personal. It's very tied to individuals. You need to understand that, and you need to find a way to persuade people that by sharing that, 1, they have knowledge that should be shared, and 2, by sharing that knowledge, they're actually increasing their own knowledge base, helping the organization, and making themselves more valuable to the organization. Alignment. Your organizational goals are going to change over time. As I stated before, there's turnover in the head of state DOTs just because they're government organizations, and you have a new governor come in and they may be appointing someone else. So the goals of the organization are going to change, but your techniques are not. So you need to keep track of what's happening at that level. Measurement. If you can't show value in their terms, they're going to lose interest. So collecting more metrics is better than not collecting enough. Opportunities, never say no. Find a way to say yes. Quite frankly, everything across an organization is related to and dependent on the knowledge and information that that organization has to conduct their core functions. You need to build on what is there, so you're validating what they already know or did, and you need to get executive buy-in, but also grassroots participation. Culture is incredibly important. Leadership actually has to believe that it's a responsibility to share knowledge and expertise to help their own organization. And management needs to understand and support that the process of making time for employees to participate. And there needs to be trust. People need to believe in sharing and be willing to ask. You're going to, somebody brought up, downsizing during this time of COVID-19 for organizations. And this trust is very much an issue in that. Because if they don't share what they know, then they're valuable to the organization and they're not going to be laid off. Versus this is someone who is a team player who shares the knowledge that they have, collects knowledge from others, and creates new knowledge that actually benefits the organization. So it's your job to convince them that by sharing it, they've actually increased their value to the organization. And then challenges. There's always going to be skepticism. How is this going to help me? You're going to hit barriers, but if you keep your eye on the goal, there's always a way. You've got to not let yourself get distracted by that barrier. And again, knowledge is personal, but it's needed by others. So how do you get someone to understand that they have knowledge to share, and that by sharing that knowledge, they've created new knowledge for the organization as well as for themselves? And I think we could take more questions.
Okay. LaDonna is asking, her question is, we are in research.
Okay.
We are in the research and library part of the organization. How can we collaborate with personnel to establish a better exit interview to capture knowledge?
So I struggle a little bit with the exit polls. There are some questions that you can ask people to answer in the 2 to 4 weeks before they leave. A better plan is to create that documentation before. But if that's what you have, and that is the case in a lot of places, then I recommend you take a look at Beasley and Beasley's, what was it called? It's a knowledge continuity book. So it's really it's asking people questions, like what reports are the most important things that you need to know in this position? Who is it you talk to, and in what different areas? Those kinds of questions. So I think helping them create the questions that they should ask and actually provide to the person a week or two before they actually leave the organization will get you a bit of the way down the road. Are there other questions?
Great, thank you. All right, so Sue is asking how our knowledge can be built up over time as a natural product of reporting and documenting processes during work, footprints of daily work, etc., rather than reactively searching for relevant information when there is a report needed to put together.
Okay, so if I understood that correctly, how are you capturing?
How can we build up knowledge over time rather than kind of cramming for it at the last minute when we need to access a resource to build a report?
So I think for that, if you know the types of reports that you're going to have, then I think after all of your tasks or activities, that answering 2 or 3 main questions as an after action review that highlights, here's what came out of it, here's what we learned, here are some of the things that need to be addressed in the future, and here are the lessons or the things that we could improve upon, and have those put into a centralized area. I think that then you have that information. I know I work for an organization where we have repositories of work that we've done, where it's documents that we put together, proposals that we've done, things that we can search on so that we can pull bits and pieces out of that as opposed to hunting it down manually. I'm not sure whether I answered that question, but I did try.
Okay, let's see. Is it better to separate exit interviews from knowledge interviews?
Yes, in my perspective, yes. Exit interviews are generally focused on, are there any outstanding issues that I need to know about for the next person coming in? How did you feel about the organization? Did you have any complaints? That kind of thing. I would I would separate them, and I would have a knowledge continuity questionnaire versus an exit interview with the types of questions that I was talking about before.
All right. The next question is it necessary to have all of the positions that you listed, such as strategist, persuader, etc., or can these be split into 1 to 2 people and 2 staff take on more than one role?
Oh, absolutely. One person can take on all of those roles if it's their full-time job. But yeah, you can do it between a couple of people. They don't have to be separate individuals. Just knowing what role you're playing at what stage of the initiative is important. Are there any other questions?
Yes, they're coming in. I'm sorry. They keep
okay.
shifting there.
It's all good.
Lori, this one from Michael. Michael, would you like to ask the question yourself? Let's find Michael. Michael, you are unmuted if you would like to ask the question.
It wasn't so much a question as just another sales point where you had knowledge is personal, but it's needed by others, and a way to sell that to folks. And I think about, the DOT that I'm in, a lot of sports oriented folks, say it as knowledge wins games, but shared knowledge wins championships.
Oh, I love that. That's your elevator speech.
We also have some folks asking about a book. So I did hear you mention knowledge books. Was there another title of a book that you had mentioned? We're seeing this come up of continuity of management, preserving corporate knowledge.
Hold on.
So, and then I guess if that isn't the question, I would ask Denise to unmute Paul and let Paul ask which book that was he was asking about.
Okay, Paul. I'm sorry, just a second. Paul Imhoff.
It's Paul Imhoff.
Okay,
I pronounced that
Paul,
correctly.
you are unmuted. Paul?
Yeah, that was exactly the book I was asking about, the continuity of knowledge interviewing.
Yeah, so continuity management. Hamilton Beasley, Beazley, is one of the authors of that.
And Sabina actually posted this here in the chat, so I'm going to chat it out to everybody here.
Oh, did they find the?
I think so.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you.
It's a really useful book, I think.
All right. Any other questions that we have? So, Benjamin, did you have, let's see, Benjamin is saying that he agrees with all the required attributes of the KM lead. And that is all. Is there anyone else that has some questions for Maureen today?
You may raise your hand and we can call on you and unmute you. We do have one.
Okay.
Nikki, go ahead.
Hi, I just want to say thank you for providing the information on how to manage your program through turnover and change of executive teams and personnel, because I think that's really critical for people to know that you can sustain efforts even through those changes as long as your passion and vision stays there. And if you have some of those grassroots efforts, it's important to keep that program consistent so that when new people come in, it doesn't just become the flavor of the day.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. We do have, Deborah's asking about access to the presentation. If you guys on the call can see the handout section, we do have the 2 job aids there. That middle PDF where it says KM Journey, AASHTO, and a number, it is a PDF with this presentation in it. So you guys can download it from there. And it will also be available on the AASHTO website after. So we do have one more question coming in.
Okay.
The question is, please tell us your process of developing a KM strategy, lessons learned.
So we actually did a workshop on that at TRB a couple of years ago. I think the information was posted on the KM Task Force site. Lenny, can you send a note on the chat if that's true? So I actually have some worksheets out there that you can walk through in order to plan out your process. I alluded to some of that in the process that's under the getting started area of this presentation.
I'm not sure if we can unmute Lenny, but I do know that is out there on the TERB website. And this is Benjamin, and Benjamin, if we can get that information to you as well. If you want to email either myself or Lenny, we can get that to you.
Yes, and we can attach the link in the follow-up message, but it was 2019 TRB annual meeting, and we have made that available to the AASHTO Knowledge Management Committee members, and I think it is posted on the TRB now Committee on Information and Knowledge Management is our new name. I believe it's on our old KM Task Force website, but we'll get that link to you. I'm trying to hunt it down.
Thank you, Lenny.
Any other questions for Maureen today? All right, well, we are going to have, let's see, Jez, are you unmuted?
I am. Hi, everyone. This has been a really, really great session. I want to, first of all, reach out and thank Maureen Hammer for coming and for her guided presentation today. There was a lot that she went over, and I think that this really sets up a good foundation for us to spring forward. So thank you so much. We also want to thank our sponsors for their support of the program. We had a couple of really great sponsors, and we do appreciate everything that they have done so that we can bring to you this great content. And of course to AASHTO as well. We wouldn't be able to do this if it weren't for AASHTO, and particularly we would like to thank King G, Denise Peralta, and Megan Wozniak for your support and assistance. This has been just so important for all of us to do, and you all have worked very well with getting us up and running so that we can bring you today's presentation and future webinars. Just a friendly reminder that this information will all be posted on the AASHTO website. You can download it from the chat box or the little webinar box, but it'll also be available on the AASHTO website. And specifically, thank you to Victoria Beal, who provided the PDF vocabulary and the definitions job aid, which is a really great flow chart, and Lenny Oman for the incredible spreadsheet tool. Those are the job aids that we have with today's webinar, and both of them are really useful. So thank you for both of you and your hard work in putting those together. We'll also be sending out a follow-up survey, and we'll have more webinars coming in the future. So I really look forward to seeing you. And I'm sure I'll see many of you at tomorrow's committee meeting. So you all have a wonderful day. Thanks again for coming. And if you have any questions or you want to reach out, you know where to find us. Thank you.